things of our lives, for time to talk about sacrament, those things that call us into being in community in your name. We gather and we ask that you be with us in this time of listening and time of clarification. May our ears be open and our hearts connected as we pay attention to each other and to this theme. We pray in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. So in the workbook under the administration of sacraments, we have MNW003, ANW04, ANW10, and GC43. And so I'm curious if the folks that are presenting on those can come up here. What I'm going to do is we're going to have you do your introduction of the proposals, tell us what the proposal is, and then we'll open it up for the questions afterwards, and hopefully those will be answered. So I have Lorraine and Tammy and Georgina and Alan. Whoever gets to me first gets the mic first. Pat, which one are you talking about?
The Manitoba Northwest Ontario Sacrament for Retired Diaconal Ministers. Yes, Lorraine, I was asked to fill in for another person who needed to be at another listening session. So this proposal is I'm going to say what is the issue. I'm going to read that. We believe God is calling us to ensure that all congregations have a vibrant worship and sacramental life. We believe that the current policy, which excludes retired diaconal ministers from presiding over sacraments, is both prejudicial to the ministry personnel and detrimental to those congregations who are dependent upon retired supply for the ministry support. And what this is dealing with is making an equality that in ordered ministry, ordained ministers receive their right to provide sacrament for life, for all time. Designated lay ministers can receive the right to provide sacraments at retirement, but diaconal ministers do not have that. So when they retire, they don't have the ability to serve their pastoral charge or their area adequately. And in these times when we're small and rural ministries really need folks who, and call on largely for those who are retired, retained on the roll also, that you really need that to be in place. And if a retired diaconal minister was serving a congregation appointed, because they are in the order of ministry that does not allow that congregation, that pastoral charge, to have a sacramental elder. So there's the inability to have a full and complete sacramental life for some congregations.
Thank you. Tammy.
Good morning, I'm Tammy Allen from Alberta Northwest Conference. I am a diaconal minister serving in a rural two-point charge, speaking to the granting of the right to administer sacraments to all diaconal ministers at the time of commissioning. The issue is one of equity or lack of it. Diaconal and ordained ministry personnel are indeed of one order, and yet within that one order we are not afforded the same rights. Many of our pastoral charges are served by a single ordered minister, and sometimes those folk are diaconal. Our styles of ministry may be different, however, in function, we are often very similar. Yet diaconal ministers are not granted the right to, at commissioning, to celebrate sacraments. Even in pastoral charges where there is both an ordained and a diaconal minister, ideally, both are in equal relationship with the people they serve, with the communities they serve, and therefore both should have the equal rights to celebrate sacraments granted in a manner that reflects the equity of their roles and their relationships. So in our preparation for ministry study, diaconal ministers prepare as much as as our ordained brothers and sisters for this right, and yet we are not granted it in the same way. So I'll just leave it at that, trusting that you've read the proposal.
Georgina? I'll let Alan go last. Georgina.
My name is Georgina Barron, and I'm from St. Paul Presbytery in Alberta Northwest Conference, and we are primarily a rural area, and so we are fast approaching the point where we are without ordered ministry or diaconal ministry, and so it is becoming a problem with us to have people there who can serve sacraments. And we're finding that if we don't have the sacraments, people are starting to not come. Like if I can't have my baby baptized when it's convenient for me, then I'll either go to another church or I just won't bother having him baptized. Or similarly, the other sacrament of communion, people are coming and going, people are traveling, and they like to know that we are having communion on these certain Sundays, and so we can plan our months accordingly. So basically, what Pat had to say is our concern as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alan Hall, and I serve as the Executive Officer for Ministry and Employment in the General Counsel Office. I was asked by Alan Buckingham to provide some overview of our current practice that might be helpful in considering the proposals that are before the Council this week. And in thinking of how to do this, what would be helpful, I kept circling back to the 2012 General Council's Statement on Ministry, which is a revision of the 2009 Statement on Ministry. And that's the most definitive document that we have adopted as a denomination to describe, not so much prescribe, but describe our understanding of these three streams of ministry that paid vocational ministry in our denomination and in our current practice. It acknowledges at the end of its statement, that we are constantly in a process of transformation, reformation, and that these statements will evolve. And this is not fixed for all time. But what I offer to you today is that it is the current statement which is intended to guide us. If it is not sufficient, then perhaps the greater value would be to go back and review the whole statement, rather than make changes that then create inconsistencies in our practice with the statement that we've made. So you can go to the united-church.ca website, and in the search engine put in Statement on Ministry, and you'll get the full statement. But a couple pieces of it that I would share with you today. It begins by acknowledging that through the Spirit who enlivens and renews the church, all members are empowered to share Christ's ministry, the work of the church. We're all called to that, we're all engaged in that. But then it goes on to acknowledge that in our tradition, it has been our practice to call up people who are recognized by the church to a particular call in leadership in the denomination. And it identifies three, and just simple definitions that are offered. Ordered ministries and those designated lay ministries recognized by the presbyteries are called to serve a distinct role in leadership. Ordained ministers serve in all aspects of ministry and are formally called to word, sacrament, and pastoral care. And the license to administer the sacraments is granted or part of the ordination. It is for life. The ordered ministers ordained and diaconal are recognized as called to ministry in the totality of the denomination. And so that's why it's not limited to a specific time or place. Diaconal ministers serve in all aspects of ministry and are formally called to education, service, social justice, and pastoral care. Sacramental license is granted upon request of the ministry to which they are called or appointed. It's not, I'm a diaconal minister and I want a license for the sacraments. It is the ministry that makes that request through the presbytery to the conference, and then the conference has the authority to grant that license. In the new structure moving forward, the request would go under a current polity to the regional council, which would make that decision. Designated lay ministers are members of the church called to exercise gifts for leadership in mission and ministry that respond to a need within a local congregation or community ministry. This is our statement. It's not necessarily our practice, but our statement is that designated lay ministry is in response to a particular need in a particular place for a particular time. And that's why the designation is relevant to a particular appointment. And at the conclusion of that appointment, the designation is not there. So if the person then moves on to a second ministry or a subsequent ministry, there would be an assessment by the presbytery, in the future the regional council, to determine whether or not this is a ministry that the person might be designated to and granted authorities to act in a vocational way. And again, sacramental privileges are extended according to the need of that ministry. If it's a designated lay ministry appointment to a congregation with a diaconal or ordained ministry, the conference would have to determine whether or not it is critical for the provision of sacramental life for that designated lay minister to be granted a license as well. Those are our practices. One order of ministry, and I was just joking with someone who asked me how I felt about the defeat of one order of ministry, and I said, bitter, just bitter. Because I hear, and we all hear, so many concerns about the inadequacies of many of our policies in light of the practice that we are actually engaging in and the needs that are expressed by our church. And so that's why I think we need to circle back and look at the totality of our understandings of ministry as expressed in the statement on ministry before we begin making adjustments here and there. That said, moving into the new structure, one of the questions for us as staff and the Permanent Committee on Ministry and Employment Policies and Services was, are there some places where there are a multiplicity of practices across the country that there would be some benefit in bringing some consistency to? And so on the granting of licenses to diaconal ministers, after consultation with the Diaconia of the United Church of Canada, the Permanent Committee brought to the Executive, which brings to you in GC43, I believe it is, a proposal that diaconal ministers upon call or appointment would be granted, not may be granted at the discretion of the regional council, but would be granted a license to administer the sacraments. The Permanent Committee felt that that would bring consistency for all of our regional councils without substantively changing the expressed intent and understanding that we find in the statement on ministry. Graham.
Thank you to all four of you. Stay close. You can go back and sit down, but stay close because as questions come up, you may want to be the ones to answer them. Alan, don't go that far. You'll have many more answers than I do. So just a reminder that during the listening session, this is a time for questions for clarification. This is not time to get into debate. This is not time to speak about whether you agree with the proposal or disagree with the proposal. This is a time for us to have a conversation, finding that those things that are still unclear about these 4 specific proposals that are in your workbook. One of our lovely stewards is here and has a microphone, so if you'd like to speak, do not just shout out. Put your hand up or stand up, and a microphone will be brought to you.
I have a question about the last proposal. If we grant licensing to diaconal ministers on appointment, would we still be able to grant licenses to retired diaconal ministers?
Yeah, so the way that the proposal is written is that it would be granted to diaconal ministers in appointment and may be appointed to diaconal ministers upon retirement. So there's 2 parts to it. One is would, the second one is maybe. Is that correct, Alan? And there is a mixed practice across the church at the current time. So this would actually solve exactly that question.
Thanks. So I think I might have just gotten my answer, but I have a couple of questions. Sorry, the echo's weird here. If I understand correctly, currently diaconal ministers upon retirement are not eligible to be licensed to administer sacraments, even if they're appointed.
That's
Is that correct?
Oh, no, that's not correct.
A retired diaconal minister who goes into a retired supply appointment would be eligible now to be granted a license to administer the sacraments. So they're in appointment. And so for the duration of their appointment, my understanding is that there is some practice in some conferences where they will extend a license to a retired diaconal minister who's not in an appointment. But that's an inconsistency with our policy. Yeah. But if they're in a call, or if they're in an appointment as a retired ordered minister, they're eligible.
Okay, thank you.
This table up here, oh, there's some questions back there. We'll get up to you, don't worry.
Just a question or a statement of clarification from the very first proposal that was spoken on. It is my understanding as a DLM that we're not eligible after retirement for any licensing or anything. So I just wanted to get that straight. I don't know, Alan, unless I'm wrong too. As far as I know, after retirement, we are not eligible for any licensing.
That's correct.
That's right,
yeah.
okay. But that's not what was said in the proposal. She said she believed that we were also eligible after retirement, so I think that should be cleared up in the proposal.
There's and I'm not sure that there's a practice of this, but we define retirement as drawing a pension from the United Church. So if a DLM retired and they're drawing their pension but then went into a subsequent appointment, they would be eligible.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't know.
So
Okay.
it's attached to the appointment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think maybe what you heard me say was that if a retired diaconal minister then is serving a congregation, so I guess that would be an appointment, or then but they are retired, then that congregation could not have a sacraments elder, so the diaconal minister could not have the sacraments.
But what we heard Alan just say was that if they're in an appointment, the conference could grant sacramental license to the diaconal minister, so currently.
Dan Hayward, Montreal and Ottawa. And I also worked with Alan on the one order of ministry. So we have 3 proposals all dealing with the administration of sacraments by diaconal ministers, and we presumably are not going to adopt all 3 as they may be in conflict with each other. Of those proposing these motions looked at possibly melding them into one, or has that been discussed with the business committee?
So the great thing about this new method of business is that during the discussion session later on today, when you get to your discussion sessions, you raise exactly that point, And the facilitation team will read the notes from all 15 of the discussion sessions, and they'll say, oh, there's some inconsistency, and from the conversations we're hearing, here's how we're proposing you move forward with these 3. It may be take no action on any of them, but do this instead. So the new proposal method will take us into that sort of way, where during your discussion sessions, and if every 15 of the discussion sessions says the same thing in the notes to the facilitation team, they will hear that clearly as the church saying something. So use those kinds of things during your discussion session to make sure that they get noted, because that's where that will happen. So thanks for the question, Dan.
Just wondering the bounds that will be given to the diaconal ministers for what will be the area in which they're allowed to celebrate the sacraments. Sometimes conferences offer the entire conference. Sometimes it's limited to the pastoral charge.
So GC20 is without a boundary limit. So that's what they're suggesting, is that upon appointment, a diaconal minister would be granted sacramental license everywhere. And upon retirement, they may be. And so that is without bound. This table up here, 42, has 2 people at it.
Wayne Sanderson, Manitoba Northwest Ontario Conference. I'm asking a question of clarification on process, Ellen. You said that these proposals are looking at changing the statement of ministry. If it is the will of the church that the statement of ministry be changed, is that not what the use of proposals should be directing in this process? So there's issues with diaconal ministries or DLMs. The proposals are pointing those out. Would it not be the process then that the executive would take that information and say, whoops, we need to make some adjustments here? So it's a process question I'm asking.
And what I would suggest is that the process would be to make a review and change the statement on ministry rather than changing the policies around it. So changing the policies change our practice, but don't change the statement on ministry. So would we not start with our statement of ministry and have our policies then consistent with it?
So to make that happen,
please use the mic.
Sorry. So to make that happen, you have to have a proposal that says, take a look at the statement of ministry and change it. Is that correct?
During discussion session, that would be something you would raise, that perhaps what needs to be looked at is the statement on ministry. And so then that gets recorded in your notes, which goes to the facilitation team, and in their recommendation back to us, if they've heard that enough, that might be part of the recommendation.
Brenda Curtis, Saskatchewan Conference. So just for clarification, if that was the case and it was to go back, that GC would look at the statement on ministry, how many years do we anticipate that would take? Because some of us diaconal folks are getting a little tired of waiting.
I've been working on some of these changes for nearly 20 years now. And I had color in my hair then when we started. If we were looking at a substantive change, or say for a diaconal ministry, that by right of commissioning, that they would have authority for administering the sacraments, I think that's a basis of union change, would be a remit. Because it's stated in the basis of union. That's the Ministry of Word, Sacrament, and Pastoral Care, and Ministry of Education, Service, and Pastoral Care. So that would be a longer-term change. If we were looking at reviewing the statement on ministry, that would happen over the triennium if it was directed, and proposals would come back to the next General Council, and with it could be proposals to change the policies if that statement is adopted, a revised statement is adopted.
Thanks. Questions for clarification, please raise your hand if you can, or...
Ingrid Brown, British Columbia Conference. I'm just wondering if some of this denominational policy will be covered in the Office of Vocation and in its creation, and so are we a little bit ahead? Like, is this two steps down the road and we first need to do the Office of Vocation before we're doing the denominational policy on certain things like this?
The Office of Vocation will only, the General Council still sets the policy. The Office of Vocation will implement policy that is set by the General Council. So it's actually our job as commissioners to make decision about whether this is the policy we want implemented by the Office of Vocation.
So we're going in the right order. Thank you.
And I even looked for a nod to make sure I was saying the right thing.
Hello, Vicki McPhee from Alberta Northwest Conference. Just to clarify on the statement before that question, in the basis of union, it says that ordained ministers are called to word, sacrament, and pastoral care, and diaconal are called to Christian education, justice, and pastoral care. So is it that piece that ordained people are called to sacraments, which then gives the rite of sacraments following their ordination? Because I've tried to find in the basis of union where it says then they have the rite of sacrament. And so, I'm just wondering what makes that the ruling, because it doesn't follow that ordained people can't lead social justice marches or teach Christian education. And so I'm just wondering what it is about, and maybe this is part of the discussion time, but I'm just wondering why in those, what we're called to, why that one out of the 5 functions of ministry or the 5 aspects of ministry, why that one is say a licensed piece.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's correct, that it's because it's in the naming of the call, but also a historical understanding of theological difference between diaconia and ordained folk in other traditions. Was that, Deborah and Alan, is that where that would also come from, sort of the theological? Yeah. Discussion time, there'll be more clarity. We have another question up here. The mic is coming. Oh, let's go there and then we'll come here. It's all good. Go in order so you don't have to run around.
I need a hint. Okay.
I won't forget you.
Christina Paradella, Hamilton Conference, diaconal minister. So, question of clarity. Someone else had raised a question around bounds of the authority to administer the sacraments. So, if a diaconal minister were granted the right to administer sacraments upon commissioning, then would that broaden the bounds of where they could administer? So, case in point, I am half-time serving a congregation, sole paid accountable, therefore the church deems me worthy of a license to administer sacraments in this congregation. I don't serve, I work at a long-term care facility in a role of chaplain in an institution that recognizes my authority of the church given to me. And so I can then, if it's one of my congregants lying in the bed, can serve them communion. The woman in the bed next to her says, hey, can I have a little bit of that? And I have to say no, right?
It depends on the definition of the bounds that your Presbyterian conference set when granting you the license. And one of the inconsistencies across the church is that some jurisdictions will say anywhere within this conference or anywhere within the presbytery or only in the pastoral charge. So GC43 does not establish boundaries, and so it's saying that when in a call or appointment, anywhere within the United Church of Canada that you are called on to preside at the sacraments, you would have authority to do so. So it would bring that consistency to the denomination.
Ellie Moyer, Montreal and Ottawa Conference, laity, speaking to ANW 10, which is not one that I think that has been spoken to yet. I'm wondering if anyone has considered including a slight variation or an adjustment to this granted that ministers can be spread very thin in rural areas, but also can be overworked and spread thin in big urban areas. And I wonder if maybe not, we could have the option that communion can be offered by Sacraments elders, but that normally in a big urban area at least, that one would wait for an ordered minister to perform a baptism except in an emergency. And I speak to this based on my own church community, where being in uptown Montreal, we have people come in when the minister's not available who would like communion. And I also, quoting a minister in a 4-point charge, who said to me, I don't feel any walls going up against that. It would be nice if the other churches could get communion when I'm in a different one.
Yeah. So that's, again, during your discussion time, please make sure that that gets raised as a suggestion for a way forward. This is a specific clarification questions or things that are unclear, or if you have like manual questions about them. But I think that's good for folks to hear, because it gives us an idea of, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's a question for a clarification and what's a question for how do we move forward. So thank you for that.
Linda Hunter, Calgary Presbytery, Alberta Northwest Conference. I would just like to have more clarification about how this affects our ecumenical partners. We've talked about it briefly, but I'm not quite clear about that. So that would be helpful if I could hear some of that.
In conversations with ecumenical partners, there is a great bewilderment that we have in this church people presiding at the sacraments and authority to preside at the sacraments who have not been ordained by the laying on of hands. And so that's very problematic and perplexing. Recall in the One Order of Ministry work, the Anglican United Church Dialogue issued a statement expressing appreciation for the direction that the proposal was moving in, because it would address this dilemma that there are people who are not ordained presiding at the sacraments. We have, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're a pretty low church, probably 2 or 3 in most of our congregations around our sacramental orientation. You move into Anglican and Roman Catholic traditions, they'd be 9s and 10s. And so we're fairly low church around sacraments, and that really puzzles folks who are higher church. So.
Microphone is on its way.
Kimberly Heathbay of Quinte Conference. Just wondering what kind of education happens for diaconal ministers and designated lay ministers around the sacraments. Is that a clarification question, or is that discussion?
Nope, that's a clarification question. Deborah Kagar, do you want to use, there's a mic right there. Deb Kagar is the chair of the Permanent Committee for Ministry Employment Policies and Services.
And also a graduate of the Center for Christian Studies and a diaconal minister who is retired. Yes, we are trained. We receive theological training in the sacraments as part of our courses at CCS. DLMs, is there a DLM would like to say what kind of training you received in the sacraments? I guess it's Sacraments Elders training, somebody? Yes, Wendy? Okay. So Wendy, who serves as a DLM in Newfoundland, says that they receive theological training throughout their school, and part of that is around the sacraments. Yes, in terms of sacraments. So we're all trained for the sacraments.
Brenda, do you have a question, or were you going to add something to that? Okay.
Just further to that question, Brenda Curtis, Saskatchewan Conference, can we hear about the ordained training for sacraments?
I'm not ordained yet, but I'm a candidate. I'm Cynthia from Toronto Conference, and I just finished my United Church worship course with Fred Graham, who I'm sure many of you know. We do get training. I actually got to practice baptism on both a fake baby and a live baby as well. I also have done communion. But there's another weird thing in our church with students. So I'm a student under an appointment. I serve a church and have for 3 years in Toronto. And Toronto Conference grants sacramental license to students. It's specific, so only within your charge. So I've been doing communion and baptism and marriage for 3 years. I actually did it before I was formally trained, but I knew how to do it because I had good teachers in terms of the congregation and retired ministers helping me do that. But it is an inconsistent policy even within students. So I can do sacraments, and I think there are some retired diaconal who can't, and I can, and I think that's an inconsistency.
There's a question in the back.
In response to the question about the training we received as ministers of Word, Sacrament, and Pastoral Care, I was required in going through seminary. I'm Jay, by the way, BC Conference, Minister of Word, Sacrament, and Pastoral Care, and doing interim work presently. When I went through seminary, we were required to do a course on worship and liturgy, which included the sacraments. It involved annoyingly deep and hard biblical, theological, historical learning on the history of our sacramental life and the distinctions in ministry. What was particularly formative for me was I went to an ecumenical seminary, which then years later went to work also in the Presbyterian Church USA. What I saw very clearly then, what I see very clearly now, is not a hierarchy in ministry, but my training and education, not just training, so I didn't drown any poor children, though I've come close, is what was formed in me was a profound understanding of the distinctions and the equality of these ministries. So to be an ordained minister of Word, Sacrament, and Pastoral Care does not make me better than a diaconal minister, a designated lay minister, an elder even. It is different. And so that's, for me, the lens and the education and my ecumenical experience that brings me to consider this matter in the way of those distinctions which go back a long way to Paul and before that.
So, question for the clarification was around the training received. We've heard a few different answers. Is this more in response to that, which is probably more discussion? And so I would like to move us into more questions of clarification because the discussion can continue going. And I think that's the important piece. So,
Graham, it's a different experience to ordained minister in a United Church college. Particular professor did not give us the depth that we heard from Jay and others, Heather Leffler. So just to say that we did a worship course, we have the theological background, but our experience of the sacraments was breaking bread together and dipping our hands in bowls of water.
So again, inconsistencies across the country. So we have some questions up at the front. Thanks to our fabulous steward for running around this room a lot.
My name's Murray. I'm looking for some clarification. I hope this counts as clarification, probably from Alan, about his comments about practices not consistent with our statement. And I'm curious, we've had a statement on ministry for at least 65 years, maybe 75 or 90. Have our practices ever been consistent with our statement on ministry?
Welcome to the United Church of Canada.
There's an answer.
I'm Penny Culverson from the Bay of Quinte Conference, and I'm a layperson, but I was excited to hear about the education that all these people have received in the sacraments. And I wonder if a study has ever been done of the people that have been lost in the United Church and gone elsewhere because of this.
So again, raise that during your discussion session, because I think that's a good conversation piece. And it's not one that we can answer directly.
That is a good conversation piece. My name is Lorna Standing Ready, and I'm a commissioner from the All Native Circle Conference. I did take training as an elder for Sacraments, a very good training program, but I have not been able to use it because of the red tape of the United Church of Canada. I have been called on by my people to do sacraments, and I have to tell them I can't do it. I have been called on by the hospitals to go and baptize a little one who has been born still. I can tell you a lot of stories, but we are missing out on our members at that small age, and it's pathetic with the red tape. We don't have a minister from the All Native Circle Conference for the Regina Pastoral Charge. I have been there as a lay person, and also in my traditional way. So what my people are doing is going back to the traditional way and having a naming ceremony. And this is part. And I would so love to see the traditional and Christian way mingling together, which brings it such a rich thought and rich feeling to our people. So that's another discussion point, that we had all these things going before we were colonized, and I remember them, but I will be gone soon. So as I said to the people here, don't forget us. We have had that. And to say one more thing is these sacraments. People look up to those people who have been called to many things of pastoral work. And yet, we like to put designations on people when it's the people who should be speaking. And I'm so sorry that there's not more of us here from the All Native Circle Conference who know the real need of our people. They are going to other places, other religions. Oh, I could tell you some awful stories, but this is all I can take for time. Miigwech, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. There's a question here.
Hi, I'm Etienne from Hamilton Conference. I'm still thinking about an example that Christina gave and also an answer that Alan gave. And my question is more about the powers of this council regarding those prepositions. So GC20 doesn't prescribe any area that would entitle diaconal ministers to practice the sharing of sacraments upon appointment or call. So it doesn't, but does it restrict other levels of the church to impose those boundaries again? What I'm wondering is that if we leave it open and then regional councils or any other kind of structure we might come up with decide to restrict it again to just your congregation or just that zone, I mean, does this council have the power of saying, no, it's open and it's going to stay open, so like kind of tie the ends of other bodies or not?
So, because we are moving out of the conference and presbytery system into regional councils, this is the right time to have this conversation, because this will be the policy of the church. And so, if GC43 was passed by the council, it would be that every regional council would therefore give a license to diaconal ministers, and the regional councils couldn't impose that if it's a policy of the national church.
So we would, if we choose to, we would have the power to say, no, regional councils will no longer have the power of having all sorts of
Right, we're making it
practices.
Consistent in the denomination.
We could say we want this to be universal, so that we don't end up with another patchwork of practices.
Yes,
if
that's
we
that's what that proposal specifically does. Yeah.
Deborah Kiger, Chair of PC Maps. So just for your information, as we drew this proposal up and when we brought it before the Diaconie of the United Church of Canada, there was a line about within the bounds of the region. We took that out on purpose. There are no geographic bounds in the proposal as it is. So the proposal says the region will grant at the time of call of appointment, period, which means once granted, I could serve across the church, as long as I'm in at that call or appointment at which I was granted.
And the region wants it, well, we want to do it our way. It's always been like that here. So in Region 4, it's going to be that. Because our time would be lost if we tried to do something universal that would end up not being.
In discussion, you could suggest that with no geographical limits or something. You could add that in discussion. But currently, there are no limits, and that was on purpose. There's no geographical limits in the proposal.
So it's not there, but it's not restricting, imposing limits.
And no one will be able to say we've always done it this way, because as of January 1st, no one is who they were. We're all still who we were, but the structure is different, and so if this was passed, it would be a policy and the regions would have to adhere to it.
This is a clarifying comment that occurred to me in response to both the training question and the ecumenical relationships question. In my ecumenical seminary, we had classmates who were ordained by their tradition based completely on the discernment of the call. Their call was discerned, they were ordained, and then they elected to come to seminary, and that was optional for them. And our ecumenical partners, who were earlier described as being very concerned about sacraments being administered by people who had been properly ordained by the laying on of hands, were not concerned about the level of theological training. They were concerned about exactly what we just said, the ritual laying on of hands of ordination. So within the realm of ordination, which is, as Alan said, the one order proposal was trying to expand the definition of ordination. That is what our ecumenical relationships are looking for, is that ritual acknowledgement. And in that context, the training is secondary. In our context, we have a responsibility to make sure that everything is being done according to our tradition. But I thought that was helpful, that might be helpful information to add into the conversation.
And during your discussion sessions, if that hasn't come up, you might want to raise it if that's something that feels important to you, so that it gets noted and into the conversation for the facilitation team.
John Roy from Maritime Conference. I'm becoming more and more confused in a time of clarification, which is pretty normal, but that's okay. I hear some comments about let's have a standardization of practice across the United Church. And then I hear almost in the same breath that right now conference to conference does licensing and credentialing very differently.
Correct.
I guess my wondering, and this, you can say this is discussion if you like, if these remits pass, it'll give us pretty clear direction as to where to go. If they don't, and the United Church has never been a stickler for the letter of the manual in terms of practice, will the practice revert to what the manual calls us to do and be in terms of licensing and credentialing and practice as a uniform standard? I'm getting more confused about how that might unfold. The way we do things in the Maritimes is, I hear, differently than what happens in other areas of the country. So I'm just wondering, and I know Alan just might be ducking behind curtains by now, but that's okay.
Yeah, so the standards and credentialing will be done by the Office of Vocation, which was enacted on Sunday afternoon. This piece, it will be up to the court to make a determination about what happens with these 4 proposals specifically. And so, again, yes, in your conversation time this afternoon, make sure that these things are being raised so the facilitation team is reading those in the notes and hearing those questions and hopefully coming back with some way to respond to the concerns that are being raised in the discussion. Because that's a valid question and one that needs to be noted somewhere, but in the listening sessions, we don't have anyone taking notes.
Just to offer a little clarity following Murray's comment, at commissioning, we received the laying on of the hands as well as diaconal ministers. So in terms of our relationships with our ecumenical partners, we received the same ritual act that offers inclusion and welcome.
My name is Paul Chen, and I'm a representative from the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. And then this is just for your information, and then you'll be considering the proposal about the full communion relationship with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ probably in a couple of days. And then I just wanted to let you know about our ministry, and then we are not the church that based on a policy. So we don't have actually policy that really impose about the sacraments. And as a matter of fact, for many decades, we even didn't use the word sacraments. Instead, we used the ordinances. And then we have 2 ordinances, which is baptism and the other is communion. And then probably in terms of how low we are as a church, we are probably 0 because we strongly believe the Reformation tradition, Reformed tradition, and we strongly believe that all believers priesthood. So usually it's not just ordained ministers in our tradition, but also lay people preside the communion table too. Of course, usually at the local churches, it is the elders who are really respected by the faith community preside communion table. That's our practice. And then also we do a baptism by immersion. And then in our case, the church that I served a long time ago actually asked the parents to baptize their own children. So we have a confirmation classes that required, both parents and child to attend. And also, on the certain Sunday, it was actually the parents who baptized their child or children. So ecumenical in terms of ecumenical relationship, there are so many different traditions. So probably when you are thinking about the dialogue between communions, you are thinking about high churches, but also now you are about to enter into actually the new relationship with the low churches. So just for your information.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for clarification? Right up here.
Short question, was Jesus ordained?
That's a great conversation for your discussion groups. You're just using your hands, okay. If there are no other questions for Claire, all right.
Penny Culverson from Bay of Quinte. I'm not sure if this is the right question for this group or not, but if a neighbor goes to a church or United Church in a neighborhood and asks for if they've just moved in or whatever, asks for her child to be baptized, who is it up to say yes? Is it the minister that would say yes
So that doesn't fall into this conversation, but the answer is the session.
Session, okay.
Session official board equivalent. Breathe deep. These are heavy conversations. Breathe deep. Know that your opinion is just as valid as the person sitting beside you, even if you don't agree. Breathe deep. And know that you are a beloved child of God, and so is the person that you disagree with. Breathe deep and know that God is with us in our conversations, in our listening, in our discussions, in our sacraments. Breathe deep, and as you go from this place and go to lunch in 25 minutes, that the food that you will eat will be a sacramental meal, for we eat it together, knowing that God is in our midst. And as we partake in food around table, we also know that we are mindful of those that go without, and that God is with us all. Be blessed, and go forth from here to spend some time having these other conversations that you probably want to still be having, and knowing that at 2 o'clock we come back here, and then later on today we go to our discussion groups where all of those conversations can still happen. So thank you for your time. Thank you for those who presented. Thank you for our steward. Thank you to all of you. We'll see you later.